Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you here today. We are going to let some time to let people roll into the session, but I'm so glad to be working with everyone here on this wonderful afternoon. My name is Mike Johnston, and on behalf of IPDay, I'd like to welcome you today to our session where we're going to discuss opportunities to go over Microsoft Excel and to look at powerful ways to enhance, create, develop charts and graphs using common tools such as Excel. So this is something that I find near and dear to me because I am a statistician by education and trade. I love statistics, and we have some really great softwares that we use for statistics. But I must say that I've always liked the visualizations and the charts and graphs that Excel produces. They're colorful, they have impact, but they change often. Interestingly enough, Excel has a new release, something happens, or maybe you're using a different form of Excel, or you're using a public version of Excel versus one you have on your own desktop or laptop, and they change ever so slightly, and that tends to throw people off. And I know that it has changed quite a bit since I've been here. So I appreciate that. But it's so great to see everyone coming in. I see we have our good friends from all over Florida introducing themselves, and I'm so glad to see you, Bill and Tyrone, Valeria, Jesse, some really great colleagues and friends that we've made here across the state. So I'm so glad to be able to be here with you all as well. I do want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, and that way you can watch this at any time across any mechanism that you want, whether it's your phone, whether it is on your laptop. You can always go back and review it. But the nice part about this as well is that you can always engage in questions. So just like you're doing now, I see people in the chat. It's great to see some of our colleagues and friends. You can write your questions there, and I like monitoring both sides. So I've done a couple of these, and I can usually handle it pretty well. So I got all these different visual aids for myself. So if you see something, definitely shoot a message in the chat and let us know, so that way we can address it and I'll answer those questions. Good afternoon to our friends from Miami as well. This session is recorded, so it'll be posted within 48 hours after it's been completed. So this is an interactive data session. So our good colleague Joseph, I'm going to ask him to post the link of where you can find this working workbook with us. So that's posted in the chat here, and you can download this. This is no data that you're ever going to see from an institution. It's completely fictitious data. It's made up for this, but they're quick data sets that we can work through in a way that allows us to be efficient. So something we can do in an hour, something that you can learn that's not going to take weeks to replicate. And in this situation, since it is interactive, the solutions I've also posted there as well. So when we look at this, we'll see that on one sheet I have the data, and then I copy the data over and I replicate the exact situation that I'm going to do. So if you miss it, or if maybe you don't understand it, at least you have the outcome to review. And again, this is public, it's open. I love being able to provide this for opportunities because people can look at this in any time and use this themselves. So that way you can enhance your requirements. It's interesting. I got an email. Actually, I got two emails. So I did a session, and the session that we did prior to this one, that I did prior to this one, had to deal with Microsoft Tables and the way the tables can be used to enhance efficiency and so forth. And I got an email asking if someone was allowed to email me, and I said, of course. So I think that's pretty interesting. Hey, Don. Yeah, people, that's always something. If you have to email, of course. I love being able to entertain questions. You're more than welcome to send an email if you have a question or a follow-up question or just an idea or anecdote. So yes, that was a question that I got. So you're more than welcome to email me as well. And then secondly, I got a question and it asked about this slide actually. So I've done a couple interactive data sessions where we've talked about different tools and different strategies of leveraging data. And someone asked where I got the slide from. And this is something that actually I develop. I love doing slides. I love doing animated PowerPoints. So one of the sessions I'm going to be hosting next month is actually on quick tips you can use to do these types of slides in your own PowerPoint. I don't buy them or anything like that. I just play around and well, I don't play around, but we're going to be doing a session like that. So I'm going to take a spin from my traditional data and I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to do some PowerPoint trips and ticks. We're going to do some PowerPoint solutions. So so great to see you, Velasquez. It's wonderful to see you. So this is an interactive data session, and that data source has been posted in the chat. So for anyone that's just joined over the last couple minutes, let us know if you don't have the data set, so that way you can download it and you can follow along with this session. I also want to let everyone know that I am up here in the Panhandle. I'm up here in Pensacola, Florida, and right now we have shut down all of our schools. We shut down community because we're in such a bad weather situation. So if the power flickers, I apologize. I have a little data backup. I mean, a backup here, but it is pretty bad rain and winds out here. We're supposed to get 80-mile-an-hour winds in the next little bit. So if you hear some howling, that's where it is. So just keeping everyone on the know about the weather situation that I'm experiencing up here in the Panhandle. For anyone that's attending, that's up here as well, safety to you. Oh, thank you, Ellie. I appreciate that. Oh, it's great to see you, Anna. So that's the reason why I would jump off. But now let's go ahead and talk about some data. I see we've had so many people get introduced, and it's great to see everyone. I'm so excited that you're here. And here we're going to talk about some really great tips to to be able to create Excel. And one thing that to create Excel, to create data and charts in Excel. One thing that's happened over time is that Excel has added some, I don't want to coin the term AI for this, but it's added some artificial intelligence. You will put data into an Excel, you'll open it up. Hey, it's great to see you, Mary Luz. Hey, Cindy. Glad, yes, you're in the Bay. Thank you so much. Friends, I appreciate you. That often people will put data in Excel, and now there's ways that Excel can recommend outcomes to you. And I've read, but I don't know anyone that works for Microsoft, that when you use these recommendations, that these algorithmic choices are not solely based off of the structures of the data set, but they are based off of what you primarily choose. And so they build off each other. It's what are recommended for you. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but I have noticed after I was told that when I was testing and using the AI portion of Excel to generate charts and graphs, visualizations, that it was recommending the same ones over and over, even if I changed up the structure of the data source. So today, it's not just going to be about how to create the visualizations. We're going to go over some really great technique for that, but also what type of data structures does someone need in order to create an outcome that they want to see? And that sometimes is the biggest hill when it comes to developing these charts and graphs. And I don't know if anyone would like to echo their experience in the chat, but that's happened to me so many times where I know I want to create a beautiful dual axis graph and I have to really reflect on the data structure, because if the data structure is not oriented in the correct manner, then Excel will not be able to create it for you. There's very little that you'll be able to do, even behind the scenes in programming. So that's something to reflect upon as well, is that we're not just going to tackle how to create and how to add tables, and we're going to do a little bit of regression. Do not be afraid. I'm not going to actually do the calculations. We're just going to interpret it. You're going to see how easy it is to add some regression lines to your data. But we're also going to talk about the orientation of the data structures, and I'm going to give some examples of what they look like or what they should look like in order to get an outcome that can help you. We are going to talk about 15 different types of visuals. And I love it because there's all these different types of visuals and all these little things that you can do. It's not all the visuals. And charts and graphs, they are a form of art. I believe they are this artistic portion of statistics and data science that has really evolved over time, when historically we could just provide two-dimensional drawings of some bars and some potentially lines. Now there's ways to really change up and enhance visuals so they can grab people's attention. But remember, they have to be something that grabs your attention. You have to be able to look at these charts and graphs, and even not knowing anything about the data itself, being able to identify and says, yes, exactly, Don. It has to tell a story. It has to scream to you. It has to be able to be pronounced, but not overly confusing. And I have seen all too often where data structures are made and they present in a way that is often not the way we expect it, and we try to compensate and we create very tough, very difficult visuals, and sometimes they're just overly informative, which causes restrictions on the users. So it's a fine line between simple and complex, and sometimes simple is better. So that's important. A lot of the people, the stakeholders that are using this, are your executives. They are the directors or the deans. They are the grant stakeholders, and they need to be able to look at a report and in minutes identify some theme. And it has to identify, just like our colleague Don said, it has to identify that story. So in here, I just wanted to present an example of very good analyzable data. And in here, we have an example of some age groupings and some genders, and then we have a total. We have a total. So this is an example of students. This is they're grouped by age. They have some genders, and there's a total that aligns to the sum of the genders of the students. So that's something that's great. But I want to let everyone know to be very careful. And the one thing we want to be very careful about in this data is that grand total. Because often when we tell Excel that we want to take a table like this and produce a beautiful visual, that it will often include that grand total. So be on the lookout when your tables have totals. Be on the lookout when your tables have totals, because often that'll be brought in to your Excel. So you want to compensate for that. We're going to look at an example of that today. So an example of data that we often get that we think we can analyze, and we should be able to print a chart, and we should be able to develop a beautiful graph, is something that that isn't really analyzable. And this is the way that we get a lot of reports. A lot of reports from enterprise systems, whether they are your internal student enterprise system, potentially when they are a survey response. There's a lot of origins about the data. There's a lot of origins about where data can originate. Okay, that's an interesting way of saying it, but there's a lot of ways you can get your data. But in this type of situation, it is extremely difficult to analyze because there's no way for Excel, for a SAS, a Python, any type of software to actually aggregate something. But interestingly enough, the data that I have here is actually a numerical representation of the data that is right there. Fascinating, because that is large data. You can look at it, you can say, oh, who is student ID number 3? Who is student ID number 6? But this way, you can actually take your data, you can analyze it, you can identify the theme that's associated with that data. So be on the lookout for these types of data structures. I call this my story data. This is the underlying data that makes up all the charts and the tables. And this is an aggregated form of my data. This is taking my story and it puts it into a quick numerical summary. So being conscientious of that is very important, because often we get this and we want to try to create a chart or a graph and we get a blocker because we're like, I don't know. I'm asking Excel to help me do this and it's telling me that I can't do anything and I don't have the right numbers and so on and so forth. But we can work through that today. And remember, when we do this, we want to make sure that we want to bypass complexity and we want to analyze and develop the data such that it tells that story. And you can often do that in one chart and graph, but you can actually do that in multiple charts and graphs. So before I dive in, I like to just go over two quick definitions. I don't go very definition heavy, but I like to talk about the different two major types of data fields of data. And I'm sure most of us here have gone through some form of statistics in the past, but if you haven't, that's okay. If you could imagine two different forms of data, one being categorical and the other being numerical, that will help us tremendously in today, because different types of visuals that we're going to create today are dependent upon the type of data that we have and how much of that we have. So a categorical variable is often called a string. So if anyone have heard of the term string, it's not just like the yarn that we can wrap things up with and tie knots and so forth, but it is a text. It is a text field. But sometimes string fields can be in the form of numbers, but they don't really have the same numerical meaning. So how does that differentiate from a numerical variable? And a numerical variable, the way that I remember that and how I can differentiate in my head versus in your head. In my head, how I differentiate is if I can multiply, divide, add, or subtract the two numbers together, any of those numbers and the variables together, and it makes sense to do that, then I know I have a numerical variable. So here, for example, some people may have some very protected data. They may have socials and social security numbers, even though they have a whole bunch of numbers in them. You can't really add or subtract someone's socials. You can't multiply two social security numbers together. Then it's not really a numerical variable for graphing and Excel and SAS and any type of software that you use. It's not going to be considered numerical. It's considered actually contextual. It's descriptive, just like someone saying that they like the color blue or that I'm a male. It's the same exact value there. It just describes the situation. So A numerical field can be added or subtracted, and it makes sense to add or subtract. So, for example, if I attended 10 hours in a course and my colleague, she attended 13 hours in a course, we could add my 10 and her 13, and we can say the total attendance between the both of us is 13 hours. And that allows us to identify those situational outcomes. So that's really the big part to this, is looking at those types of fields. So now, for all of us that are ready to dive into some data, we're going to go ahead and do that. So if you can open up your Excel, if you have access to being able to open up the Excel that we downloaded, if you oh wow, we got some really great attendance today. This is wonderful. If you do not have that and you need it, let me know. Shoot a message in the chat, and we can get that link up for you. But I think everyone was here at the time that it was posted. So just make sure, if I can get a confirmation, is everybody able to see my Excel in there? Thank you, Joseph, for posting that chat. I just want to make sure we're all able to see that Excel. We get some commotion going on in the chat. I like the commotion on the chat. That always keeps me going. Okay, thank you, Don. I appreciate you confirming that we're all able to see this. So Alaska, thank you so much. I appreciate you all confirming. I love the chat. I love being able to see and talk to people. That's one of the reasons why I love doing this so much and working with IPDAYS, because of the mission. The mission is so important that we're able to elevate people in their path and their career and change their stories. And I can help you that are all doing that. So I feel like I'm hitting so many great experiences in my life. So I enjoy this very much. But I love being able to talk virtually with everyone here too. So in here, if we just go through a brief understanding of this data structure, thank you, Arlene. What we have here is that in this data structure, we have all these different tables. So down here, I have my column chart, and every time I see an updated version, that means that I have gone ahead and replicated the exact same thing I'm going to do here, and you'll be able to see the outcome. So again, if you miss something or you don't see where I clicked, or I may have gone a little too fast, that's okay, because nothing here is really going to build on itself. It's all going to be a way for you to follow through together, and you have all the answers here. So as you can see, we got some work to do, but I'm really looking forward to it. A little cool trick, I don't know if you know about that, but if you come down here to the bottom left of your Excel, between the left and the right arrow, if you right click on it, you can actually see all the pages that are available to you. So if that's something that you never knew before, and that's the one thing you take away from today, I hope that little trick helps you. It's a fun little trick that you can right click down here and you can go between all the pages in your Excel without having to click over and over and back. So here, let's talk about some column charts. So in this origination that I am giving you in this visual, I'm giving you these little tidbits. And these little tidbits talk about the data structure itself in order to create the outcome that we're gonna execute here. And I know that many of you probably can do this, but hopefully through reinforcement and building, this will lay a foundation that we're going to use later on. And the later on foundation is going to be the automation of creating these visuals by replicating what we're learning here in tables, and then using those tables and these generated outcomes in order to replicate data visualizations that will automate without you having to recreate them every time. So this is going to build up in the structure that I developed. So we learned how to use tables. We learned how to build tables. If you didn't make that session's been posted. Now we're going to talk about creating some really cool visuals and how to do them quickly. Again, we're going to learn all these different visual types and the way they should be originated in less than an hour, and then we'll be able to automate all of this together. So that way, instead of you having to do this every single time, I've seen people in their lives where they get a new data set and they have to go through and recreate the visuals that they've already created, the graphs and the charts, and that just takes so much time. So here we're going to be able to bypass that, but it's going to be an effort of several different sessions. So looking forward to that. As we can see here in these fields, we have an academic year and we have an enrollment. And I think this is pretty fair for most of us to have across our institution. I'm just using small excerpts so that way we can get through a lot of different types quickly. But again, if this had 100,000 rows, okay, 100,000 rows, that'd be a lot of data. It'd be great for that many students, but it's the same thing. You're going to do the exact same thing for 10 rows, 8 rows, 7 rows as you do for 25 and 100,000 rows. So in a column chart here, a highlight that I have identified is that one field needs to be a categorical field and the other one should be numerical. And if you don't have that, it's going to be very tough to create this type of view. So in here, the ways we're going to do this is we're going to hit these objectives 1 through 8, and then we are going to evaluate our work, and then we're just going to continue on. So the best part about working through this is that I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to shift this down because you'll have this for your history. And hopefully when you work through this, that you'll be able to see what I do and then replicate that. So what I always like to do here is that I like to highlight my data. So I start up here in the first field A1, and then I just left click, drag and drop. I left click, drag and unclick all the way down to my B8. And then I go up here and I see that in my insert ribbon, this is called your ribbon, you have this insert option. And this insert option lists all these different charts that are available. And this has changed pretty drastically over different versions of Excel. That if in doubt, you're up against the wall and you have to put together a visual. Someone has said that they are curious about something, or maybe your supervisor says, "Hey, I need this ASAP. I need this on the fly." That there are recommended charts that Excel is going to produce for you that are specific towards your data, and then some that I believe are specific towards what type of data you like to create using Excel. But again, I don't know how this algorithm works where it recommends values. But when we click on that recommended chart tab, this recommended chart option here, this also gives you the ability to select all charts. So it also gives the ability to select all charts. So these are all the selections that Excel has. And then in here you have some options. You have these sub options, I guess you could say, and then you're able to select these from those. I will tell you that we're only going to touch on a brief small, well, maybe not small, but a good portion of them, but we're not talking through all of these, but some that I think are very powerful, that are nice to create, especially with the type of data that we have. Most of us that are here because you work in education in some way. There are different types of visuals that I would create if I was working, for example, in sales. Sales is something that you see is very different because of the type of services that are provided. But usually in our services, it's usually towards studying success, retention, completion, graduation, average scores, attendance, and so forth. So there's going to be some that are a little bit more effective than I think than others. So again, going to that, when you look here, you're going to be able to come up to these little fields that are adjacent to the recommended charts, and they all have little drop downs, little drop down arrows. And this is just the exact same thing that you see. It's a subpopulation of all of these. But if I want to go ahead and create, and this topic is a column chart, the column chart option is actually pretty spiffy, because you can come down here and you can select any of these columns, and without you left clicking and just highlighting. So right now I'm just highlighting. It will actually change the visual based off of you highlighting over it to give you a preview of what it would be when you actually select it. So in this situation, you have these two-dimensional columns, you have these three-dimensional columns, you have this 2D bar, and then you have 3D bar. People have asked me and they say, "Mike, what is the difference between a bar chart and a column chart?" And I say, absolutely nothing. The only difference, it's really not absolutely nothing, but the only difference is the origin of your data. So one is a horizontal value, and the other one is vertical. So a column has, just think of vertical columns, that's vertical orientation of your data, and a bar chart is just a horizontal, the exact same thing horizontally. So in this situation, you'll see here that this one's different. It's called stacked. We're going to do one of these examples. If you hover over these will actually give you the names of the different types of charts and graphs that are available. So it'll give you the names. It'll give you a little description about them as well. So in this situation, I'm just going to pick something that is relatively easy. But when I reflect upon it, let's say that I just, I don't really know exactly what I want. It's completely okay here, because this can give you some great recommendations. But often I think outside the box. Sometimes I like to be unique. Sometimes I like to be original. But sometimes I don't want to have to deviate from a norm. So whenever we think about enrollment by year, by term, by period, often I don't want to throw that into a visual that's inconsistent with what's done nationally, what's done at your organization traditionally. I don't want to go and throw this into a form of a area chart when that's not the way this is traditionally looked at your institution. If you look at enrollment over periods being academic timeframes, usually we see that longitudinally. We usually see that in a horizontal view. So that's exactly what we have here, and I like that, because when I look at my recommended charts, we're going to talk about line versus our column. This is the exact same thing that we're going to get when we have here. If you look at this and you do not have these options, you're using a different version of Excel than we have. So if you are using a different version of Excel, that's completely okay. Some have larger ribbons. And just as an FYI too, on these drop downs when you are here, there is always a selection of more. And I cannot tell you how many times people don't realize this is actually a very valuable tool in your drop down. So for example, in my recommended chart, you can see here that I have an enrollment clustered column. This is called a clustered column chart. And in here, when I select my two-dimensional charts and I select this little down button, I don't see that as an option. I don't see that anywhere, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just because it's hidden down here under more column charts. So in this situation, clearly this chart that Excel is presenting doesn't make sense to us because we only have one numerical outcome. We have the outcome of our enrollment. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to select this, but you don't have to do it. And I'm just going to show you what would happen here if I selected this and I really didn't want it. I'm going to open this up, and here on this situation, I have my enrollment here. Then I have these vertical values that are all at 2000. I don't know what Excel was thinking when it did this. When I click this little plus sign, I'm going to go over and I can see some chart elements. And this is the exact same thing as if I were to go and left click on this. And now I have this chart design ribbon selection that opens up here. So when you left click on the chart versus clicking outside of the chart, when I left click on the chart, it now gives me these chart elements that are here. The chart elements that are here and the options that are presented to you here under the chart design ribbon are the exact same elements that you see here at the plus key. So this plus key that's adjacent, it allows you the same thing as it is when it's up on the top. In this situation here, if I click on my data labels, I can see, oh, that's what Excel did. Excel didn't really interpret the data the same way I did. These all looked like they were vertical and equal, but in reality, they weren't. In reality, Excel interpreted these as being a number that is a quantity. It said that this is really, okay, 2018, even though we know that to be a time discussion that is specific to a year, Excel says, I think this is a numerical field, so I'm going to graph it for you. And that's exactly what it did here. It graphed your data. And a lot of people get very frustrated with this. And that's why it says that we have these 7 outcomes, even though we do have these 7 outcomes. This is really what I wanted on my x-axis. This is really what I want on my y-axis. So I'm going to go through on how to change that. But for this means and purposes, I was just using that as a demonstration, so I'm deleting it. Again, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add this. I'm going to go to my insert. I'm going to go down to my, I'm going to choose to go to my, my insert column or bar chart. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on my more column charts. I'm going to click on my more column charts. Now I realize, oh, okay, Excel, you figured it out. You've realized that I did want my x-axis to be the academic year. So I'm going to select this one. And in this situation now, Excel actually picked out exactly what I wanted, what I thought in my head I wanted to have. And that's how we just have to work through this together. That even if you pick the wrong one, you can change that, but sometimes it's better just to find the right one. And then in doing so, you can actually implement that. And that has changed. So I went to undergrad in 2000, so it's been a good minute. And in 2000, when we had to use Excel, and I remember this like it was like yesterday, that we had to choose and tell Excel what the field of the x-axis was and what the field of the y-axis was and what we wanted to graph it. And you actually still can do that. You still can do that. And we're going to go through an example. And that's going to be here under your chart design ribbon where you're going to select the data. So in here, it's going to be the exact same thing that you saw if you're my age or older or younger. So really at any age, you may have seen this. But in this situation, Excel is going to develop this for you. There is actually very few ways to input this into the data source without actually selecting an option at the beginning. It's actually more complex to go this route by putting this in versus asking Excel to recommend something to you. So keeping that in mind, I hope this is going to then make sense. So in this situation, when we look at this, what I did to get to this is that I came to my chart design and I selected my data. You're allowed to do a couple different things in this view, but we're going to work here from left to right. The chart elements we talked about, yeah, Robin, no problem. I'll definitely repeat that. So in this situation, Robin, when I click on my select data is going to be the data that was used to create this visual. And notice you can see that the perimeter of this box up here on my top left is blinking in green. And that's just telling you that it was using this data in order to create this outcome. Historically, you would actually, if you go back like to Microsoft version 2000, you had to put this in for it to create this. And now it's the opposite. Excel gives you the visual and then tells you what it used in the background. This is your x-axis, your horizontal value button. We're going to talk about, what happens if I just want to delete a field and it's going to take it out. But we can always add it back in at any given time. Oops. by selecting the data one more time and adding it back in. So you can remove outlying fields if you want to, but we'll go through that in the analytics. Working through here, you can see your chart styles are in an option that allows you to select different chart visuals. I recommend that if you select one style, you consistently use it, because it's just, I don't want to say offensive, but you don't want to confuse people if you're developing a report and you decide to choose to use this chart style versus this chart style versus this chart style. You want to be consistent in the way that you do it. Also, you want to be consistent with your colors. So if you have different colors that you like to use because they're a part of your institution, you can select on the colors change here, and you can select green, you can select orange, blue, you can pick colors that aren't even on here. And I just recommend that you are consistent with what you are doing. And I'm just going to select this color blue and keep it consistent. Notice here that we know in order to be successful in our charts and graphs, we always have to have a y-axis label and an x-axis label. And then we're going to actually dive into some regression in a second too. But sometimes for us, it's important that not only do we want to see the visual, because again, this visual is important, we want to interpret that visual. And in this situation where we want to interpret this, we see that there's a big difference between here and here. Remember, they got to tell a story. These charts have to tell a story. So I am automatically, in my brain, I'm starting to think, why is there a difference? But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and add a data table. I'm going to add a data table to this chart by clicking on my plus sign, and my data table is right here. And by clicking on this data table, it's going to allow me to then tell me where, I'm sorry, not data label, data table. It's going to then add the data table below at the bottom. So if you are someone that likes to have the data table, which is going to be this on your chart, you can actually do that as well by clicking add that data table. Here, if you choose to add your labels, you can add your labels, and by doing so, it adds the numerical values to the top as well. I highly don't recommend always having your labels and your tables. It's just too much information. People get this information overload, and I recommend one or the other. So in this situation, I recommend if you have your data table on here, don't put the labels. If you have the label, don't put your tables. So I'm just going to take the table out. The nice thing about this too is that on all these options, you have this little arrows to the right, and you can actually tell Excel where you want to place each of these values. So you can do as call outs. There's a lot of different options. I just, again, recommend consistency. So if you're going to be one that always likes to put it on the top, then you want to keep it on the top. If you're going to be one that likes it on the right, keep it on the right. Keeping that in mind, that's important. So here, I'm going to say something that's really important to me is that for me, I love to see trends. And I'm sure all of us on here want to demonstrate a trend to those that are using this. So when you do so, you are able to click inside this. So hopefully we're all able to see. I'll zoom in. When I click, not just in the chart, but on the data, on the data viz. So I'm clicking in the graph. I get a different visual. I get a different selection. And by doing so, when I click inside and I right click in here, that's different than right clicking out here. I know it seems weird, but when I right click inside where my graph is, where my bars are, that my columns, where my columns are, versus when I click out here, I get different visuals. I'm sure all of us remember that linear regression value when we were growing up and we had to go through high school and college and statistics and we had to calculate it. In this situation, it's going to do the calculations for you. When I right click on this, I want to come down here and I say format my plot area. And there's some things that you can do here in order to add this. So you get these options to look at this value. You can also dive into the shadow. You can dive into different visual aids and the visual impacts. But in here, I want to be able to look at my enrollment and say, is this increasing? Is this decreasing? What is going on? Why is this as it is? And that's an important part to being able to look at your data. So in this situation, when we want to go through, we want to look at your outcomes and actually say, hey, do I have something that's going on here that's originated? Is there a structure? And that's often what you're able to do when it comes to these types of situations, that you can actually add in this ability to look at your data and then develop some formulae about it. But keeping that in mind, when we look through these, there's going to be these options that are specific to your chart options here. So as I'm formatting, I right clicked on here on the chart itself. And then if I go down to format chart area, that's going to give me options that are a little bit different than when I right click on this and I say format plot area. Format plot area and format chart area are not the same thing. So just keeping that in mind, I've seen a lot of people over time try to go through and work through these situations. but you can always get to them because the chart area is going to be here. The plot area is going to be here. You have the ability to look at your vertical axes here. You can look at grid lines. You can look at all these different ways to do calculations about them, but that's more in depth than what we're going to go through at this. This is more of a highlighted situation. But again, it's something that you want to go through and understand that it is similar, but also when we do it, it's something that's not going to be the same every single time. So just keeping that in mind, it's important. Noticing here when we look at this, this is going to be the outcome that I want to show everyone. But remembering the format is going to be this general value here. So the y equals to mx plus b, where our m is our slope and our b is our y-intercept. The highlight of this is that when we look at adding this regression line to the chart, it's going to show you this decrease, this increase. So that's an important part to this. In order for us to do that, there's going to be two ways that we can actually look at this data to determine if we want to add the trend line to the chart itself or maybe outside. And it's just this simple. We know this is what it's going to look like because I'm showing you an example. How do we do it? It's going to be so much easier. You just come over to your plus sign, you come down to trend line, voilissimo, and you got it. It adds that trend line directly into your graph, no calculations, no extra addition. And then if you want to get a little bit more, incentivized, you can say, hey, give me this form. Give me what this looks like. Give me an exponential line, give me a forecast, or I come down here for more options, and then I can say display the equation on my graph. So all I did there was that I left clicked on my plus sign, went down on my trend line, I highlighted over to the arrow, went down to more options, and this gives me my ability to display this on the axis. And now we're just going to do a quick interpretation. This value here means for every increase in my x value, I get this much of an addition or reduction in my y value. So in this interpretation, what this means is that for every year, my enrollment's going down by about 60 students, but this does not make sense because I've seen a clear increase in my enrollment. And what this means to me is that hey, 2024 is not done yet. So clearly that's the reason why we have less enrollment. I should not include 2024 in my data. No problem whatsoever. So now in our second table, I'm going to come over to this value here. I want to come up to my chart design. And now when I select data, I see that I can come down here to 2024. Notice where I'm doing this. I'm doing this right next to the slope intercept line, the regression line. And when I remove 2024 and click OK, that's going to automatically update all the calculations so you don't have to do it again. And what this does, this says, hey, now the regression line has changed, and it says for every additional year, we see an enrollment increase of 87 students. And that's how you're able to go through and update this data. You might say, you know what, as a subject matter expert, 2020 was a rough year, it was COVID. I don't want to take that into account to this presentation. No problem. Highlight over, left click, select data, come over here and say, I'm just going to take out 2020, and you can put in a reason as to why you're going to do it, and click OK. Click OK. And that's going to update all of your formula. We spent a little bit more time on this one because now we're going to rapidly go through these other visuals and how to create these just the exact same way that we have now. Oh, the one thing I did forget to tell you was I want to add my y and my x-axis values. When you come over here, you click the plus sign, and you're just going to add those axis titles. In order for you to add those in, you're just going to double click, and you're going to call this one enrollment. You're going to double click on this one, and you'll call this academic year. Academic year. And this one, we'll call it enrollment by academic year. So all you have to do is just double click. And voila, there you go. So now let's go ahead and jump over to our stack bar chart. The stack bar chart is great when you have a summative value. You have to have in a stack bar chart a descriptor. You have to have a descriptive variable. And in this situation, 2018-19 is a little bit different of a form than what we had here, but that's okay. Excel can handle that. Now we're going to look at these two fields, ABE enrollment and GED enrollment. So in this institution, we have two different enrollments, ABE and GED, that describe the total value between 18 and 19. And this is where a stack bar chart can be very helpful. The reason why this can be helpful here is because these two values sum to this value. These two values sum to this value. And that's where stack bar charts can make a lot of data make more sense. So in order to do that, we're just going to highlight over this entire graph. So I start here at A1, entire graph, this entire chart, and come down here to D8, and I left click. And now when I left click, I'm going to go back to insert. And now often I like to say, hey, I know I want that cluster, but it didn't give me one. It didn't like the cluster. It doesn't recommend that to you. So I'm going to click over here at all charts. And in this situation, I'm sorry, I said cluster and I said it doesn't give me a stacked chart. It didn't give me a stacked chart. So in this situation, I'm going to come over here. I come down. I say, oh my gosh, I don't know which one I want. I have so many choices here. And often here in this situation, when you have these choices, I like just to go and do quick looks. I like to do quick scans because in this column, I have these different selections, and which is not the same as you have here. But the titles, for some people like to be the same repetitive users, and I tend to be that way too. The titles will always be the same. So this one's 3D. I tend to avoid 3D. Sometimes people spend more time looking at the 3D, trying to decipher 3D versus non-3D. But over here, I have my stacked column, and that's what I want to do. I want to create my stacked column. So I'm going to click OK here. And notice in this situation, I have my vertical lines. Every vertical line is representing an enrollment. Every vertical is representing enrollment. But in this, I have a values, 3 different values. I want to see what those values are. So I'm going to come up here, click plus. I know I want to add axes titles because you have to have that for any single value. And nice down here is that this actually shows me that my blue is representative of my ABE enrollment, my orange is GED, and then my gray is total. I'm going to put in my data labels because I like to see the values. I like to see those. I like to present those. I'm not going to worry about any data tables. That just adds too much if I have all this in there. So I stay away from the data tables. But in this situation, be very careful about totals. And we talked about this briefly at the beginning. Totals can confuse your data, or it can dwarf your data, because this value, this A256, is a sum of these two values. And I say, oh gosh, I don't really want this in here. I only want to see these two values. So that's all right. You can fix it. When you left click on this chart design option populates the top, and that's going to give us the ability to select our data. So again, I left click on the chart, I come to chart design, I select my data. And now on my legend entries on my left side, these are the categories. These are going to be my x-axis values. I'm just going to say, I don't want total enrollment in here. I don't want total enrollment. Thank you. Thank you so much, Don, because that's just going to confuse it. And now this gives me better proportionality of looking at my data. And clearly here, I can see that orange and blue have remained almost the same size pretty consistently. And this just gives me a visual acuity that's so important. So be very careful about adding in totals to your graphs and your charts. Again, in order for me to update my titles, I just double click on the values. I'm just going to call this year. I'm going to call this y-axis, student enrollment. You have to sort of tilt your head a little bit to see it. And then my chart title, I can call this enrollment by program and year. And voila, we are done. A very quick visual. Can you update the colors? Absolutely. I got that question. You can update the colors. In this situation, these are monochromatic. Monochromatic tones you tend to use when you have gradients, when you have numbers increasing or decreasing, describing the same population. So I avoid them. I don't mind using them in situations like this. But here, when you want to display two different categories, your ABE and your GD enrollment, I would use two very distinguished colors to represent the differences. So let's talk about that. We see here, we got this. I feel pretty good. The question was down here, total enrollment was doubling my outcome. It was doubling it. It was dwarfing the other two. It was making it just proportional. So we removed that. Oh, and I actually changed the font color. So let's talk about that too. Let's say I dive in here and I want to change and update my font color. It's actually very simple to do. When I do this, I'm just going to right click after I select the numbers. So I'm going to right click on those numerical values. So notice when I right click, it highlights just the top ones. I'm sorry, I'm saying right click, I say left click. When I left click down here and I right click on that, then it highlights these. I'm just going to come down here to font, and I change the font color to white. And now I click OK, and these change to white, and you can do it by different category. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can do it by category. Interestingly enough, you can't do it by the x-axis. You can't do it there. So you have to do it as one or the other. So that's how you're able to change the font color. If I want to adjust where these values are, you just have to come up here and you look at your data labels and you highlight on the arrow. So on the plus data labels arrow, and I might say I want these at the base. And here I can just say I want that one at the base, or you can take all of them and you can put that one at the base. So again, that is specific. So that one is specific. You can actually left click on one or the whole thing, and you can adjust where they are aligned. Whew, how we doing? Okay, we got plenty of time. Scatter charts. I love scatter charts. Scatter charts are fantastic. Key of scatter charts is that you are going to have two variables, two fields that are numerical. So number and number. This is where your scatter charts are extremely effective because you can see clusters and trends. So attendance hours and a GD mass score. This could be student Mike. This could be student Jesse. This could be student Elizabeth. This could be student Alejandro. This could be student row level data. But again, you know that Mike attended 62 hours and he achieved a GD mass score of 175. Let's plot this as a, yes, exactly. This is a very good score. Let's plot this as a scatter plot. So I'm going to highlight, left click down. I'm going to go back to my insert, and then the scatters are going to be down here, which is this this one that looks a little bit scattered. But if your eyes can't see that, like mine are aging too, you can always come to your recommended charts, click on all charts, and interestingly enough, it recognized in this situation. You probably want to use a scatter plot because you got two continuous fields. Continuous fields are also numerical; they're types of numerical data. But down here, you can see this line option. You can see here an XY scatter. And these are very powerful when you have data that is plotted. So you can click on that and you can click on this and you click OK. And now when I click on this, it creates this very interesting visual to where when I expand upon this, I can see some groupings. I can see some groupings, but I also can see some flow. I can see some flow. So again, in order for me to add my axis titles, I'm just going to click on this to add my axis titles. If I want to see my labels, I can do that, but that's going to add some confusion. In this situation, you have too many blue dots on the screen to recommend adding data labels. Some people like to add them consistently all the time. I've seen these, and this is you don't even really need the blue dots if you have that there. So in this situation, I would not add data labels. However, I would add that trend line. I would add that trend line. That trend line is very powerful. And of course, this makes sense in an idea where, those that attend more hours can do better. But again, this is something that you can use consistently. If you want to add that trend line, if you want to add that trend line to the, if you want to add the linear regression line itself, you just come down here to more options. And where's my more options? My trend line, here we go. I click on the bars. So trend line option, bar, and I'm going to click on display equation on the chart. And now I know from this interpretation that for every additional hour of attendance that my score is going to increase by a value of 0.82. So my GD mass score. If I want to update this, I come down to my title and I can just type attendance. And I always like to put the units in lowercase. Again, that's your preference. And then here, this will be GD score, GD mass score. So a very powerful way to create data. And if you have this in a series of two numbers, two numerical values, you can plot these very nicely and you can see trends and groupings. And here, I don't know if you all can see, but I see 5 different groups. I see I see this group down here. I see a second group here. I see a little third group, a fourth group, and a fifth group. So even then you can see some really cool visuals. This is the visual that we have here. This is what I interpreted with the trend line. Oh, also, in this situation, I want to go ahead and add my my legend. My legend is just coming up here. If you did what I did, I added the linear regression line 3 times. You could just left click and delete it. And oops, not the whole thing. You can actually delete this extra little value here because I added it 3 times. You just can't see it because it's the same thing on itself. So here it says this is the mass score, and this is the regression line itself. A very powerful way for us to look at scatter data. When I come over here to pie charts, I'm always very careful about pie charts because pie charts I only recommend using if you have 4 or less categories. Otherwise, you just can't really make use of it. They're just not friendly. In order for us to look at this, we have to have one categorical variable and then one that actually has numerical values. When I do the same thing, I left click, I hover over, I go back to insert, I come over here, and this one's actually pretty visual for me to see. I can click on Insert Pie, and here you get your two-dimensional pies. You can get the subset of pie. There's a lot of things that you can do, especially if you want to do a call out. This one's really good if you want to explain, a very small section. It does that for you. Um, I'm going to go here and I'm going to create mine with a call out. And in this situation, I'm just going to say it's my annual enrollment. I want to go ahead here and add my data labels. And in here, you can actually come through and talk about, why is this the way that it is? You can explain, the situation that GED is very small because students have to test into that, but most students that test that high test out of it. There's a lot of ways that you can actually explain that, and you can break this down a little bit more. So again, pie charts, be very careful because you only want to keep those at categories of 4 or less. Geography, I love geography. Geography is fantastic because you can actually graph heat maps in Excel now. In order to graph geography, you have to have some form of geographical data, whether it's a location, by state, by zip code, by county, country. You can actually graph this on a geographical map. I will tell you that in Excel, it is optimal to graph at a county level, at a state level, at a country level. However, you can get down to the cities. In this situation, I'm going to show you zip codes. So I'm going to drag over here, drop to the right. Notice I have my zip code as my x-axis. I'm sorry, I have my zip code as my first field, and I have head count and student type. But for right now, I'm going to include it all. I don't know what it's going to do, but I'm going to include it all. I'm going to come over here to insert, and I see here where it says maps. When I said maps, this map is actually a type of chart. It's a heat map. So when I click on this, it actually is going to take Florida. It's going to take Florida, and it's going to graph it here. So in here, I've never really liked the way that this one's presented itself. I've always liked this view a little bit better. So I came up here when I clicked on the chart design. I like these two a little bit more than I like the one that's delivered. It's just it's more pronounced. But in this situation, Excel does not give a good way to actually dive in and focus on the south portion of Florida. If I right click on here, I can go to Format Data Series. Right clicking on this format data series. When I go down and I see this, oops, where'd it go? Goodness gracious. Right click, format data series. There's right format data series. When I click on my map labels, you can come up here and tell it to do some interesting things, but your map areas over here to the right, you can actually get as large as the world, which is clearly going to dwarf the Miami-Dade South Florida area. But you can also come down here to only regions with data. And it just doesn't look normal to me, when you look at it in this way. It does show just the zip code dimensions, but it doesn't show it in proportion to the rest. And that's an interesting part about this, is that it doesn't show this super effectively. But again, if you wanted to show this in a visual, you could see that this is remaining, but this is your highlight down here. I can see that it did not really emphasize the head count as I was hoping it would. It actually took into account the A, B, E, and ESOL categories. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select my data. And I'm going to go here and I'm just going to say, I don't want student type. For me, I don't care about student type. I'm going to remove my student type. And then I can see this a little bit differently. I can see this in a different light. But now when I come over here and I hit edit, I want to actually color by numerical values. And when I do that, I highlighted this, and I'll just show everyone what happened. In this situation, when I removed the category by coming over here, clicking on select data, and then removing my student type, because I don't need that. That's not part of this analysis. It grouped 215 as blue. It grouped 336. It considered this now as a categorical variable, not as a numerical variable. I can actually come back out here and I can click on select data. I can edit the student head count, and I say, hey, this is not a categorical value. This is actually a numerical value. And then when you do that, you're actually going to get that heat map, and you can see the density based on your student population. So that's something that I find pretty interesting. Here I did this, and I showed the exact same thing that we had before. Jumping over to geography 2, I'm going to show you a really cool trick with this. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this before, but Excel is a pretty powerful tool when it comes to geography. It's really advancing its geographical analytics. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to left click and drag on my county. So I have Madison, Pinellas, Okeechobee, Palm Beach, and so forth. When I come over, yes, yes, totally. I understand the total. So important. Don, I get them totally. When I come over here and I click on I'm sorry, my home button, sorry, my data button, I click on data, I click on geography. When you do this, it actually recognizes these counties as being counties, and each one of these has little drop downs now, and you can actually add in this data. So for example, this is the area in square miles. This is the county region, United States. You can add in the largest city in this county. You can add in the name, the population, the current population according to the US Census, and that's actually all delivered by changing the field outcome into geography. Something, yeah, isn't that pretty cool? So there's a lot of analytics you can do. Definitely explore that. But also keeping that in mind, if I want to graph this as geography as well, I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to insert. I'm going to insert my map, keeping this as such. And notice this displays pretty nicely. This displays pretty nicely. I know I'm getting down to time here, but as you can see, the heat map shows pretty nicely in Florida. So I like the way it looks with data. It still can advance to its smaller areas, but I do love the ability about converting this to geographical notations. Um, I'm going to bump over here to dual axis. I love dual axis. Dual axis charts are fantastic and very powerful. That's the way to display two different sets of data at the same time. When I come over here, left click and drag, I have the enrollment by GED passing rate. I often like to know two ideas and two themes about data sets. So I have a cohort of night, day, and weekend. I'm going to insert here. And anytime that you have two different descriptors of one common field, you can actually come over here and say, hey, I want a combo chart. That's what Excel calls it. I call the dual axis. In this situation, I highlight over to this cluster column dual axis, and notice in this situation, it simultaneously graphs my enrollment by that GED passing rate. And again, just to add these values, you just have to click on this. Very, very powerful way to explain two different data values about some common entity. So super awesome, love it completely. Keeping in mind, sometimes you might have large data. And again, this was that example of data that's not really analyzable. The step before our next foundation of tables is that we're going to go here, we're going to insert, and awesome. Thank you so much, my friends. I'm glad you love it. I'm going to say I want to insert some pivot chart, and it's going to say, where do you want to put it? What do you want to select? I'm going to say, keep this in the existing worksheet as of right here. This will then allow me to then create the ability to drop my age groups in and create data that is quantifiable. So that way I can graph it. And here I'm going to put in my race. I think that's what I had my last one. I'm not going to count it. I could just do this one. I'm going to count my this. That's what I think I had this one. And now you can actually graph that because it converts it into a table of the numerical outcomes of each one. And now you can actually use this graphically, which is a great way to interpret what we have. I know we're jumping down to the last couple of minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and put a survey link into the chat. I'm going to ask Joseph to do so. And I want to first of all thank everyone for coming to this. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this series, and I definitely enjoyed having you here and being together with you today on this date. We have another one coming up on April 23rd, and in that session we are going to talk about the third edition of teaching and editing collaboration part 3. So writing, teaching, editing collaboration part 3. I'm having tongue twisters today, but thank you so much all for your wonderful day, and I appreciate you. And thank you so much for coming. Hope to see you on April 23rd at our Tech Tuesday noon session for writing, teaching, editing collaboration part 3. Thank you all so much. It was so great to see you all. Ellie, always great to see you. Randy, always good to thank you so much. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Cesar. Oh, you as well. Thank you so much, Ellie. Have a great evening too. So great to see everyone. Oh, Arlene, always a pleasure, Arlene. Thank you so much.